Hi, good day, everyone. My name is Alex. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend our webinar today. I am Leader's National Trainer, and I'm going to be discussing Ubiquiti's guest portal setup with you guys today. So yeah, like I said, thank you for joining. I hope everyone had a good long weekend. This webinar is a little bit more technical than the usual ones that we do. Many of the technical topics that we discuss as well tend to kind of overlap with each other, and this is a bit of a continuation on the topics that we've covered previously. If you miss any of the webinars, feel free to check out our YouTube channel. We do post all the videos on there as well. And if you want to go deeper on any specific topic, chances are we've either already covered it or it's still coming up in one of our future webinars as well. But please do check out our YouTube channel to see what we have and what's coming up. And as with any of the webinars, suggestions are most welcome. So if you have any comments or suggestions for future topics, please feel free to post them through onto the chat section now, and we'll happily take a look at them. The video that I've recorded today, a couple of videos that I'm going to be showing you guys, is recorded on a UDM Pro SE, but your setup at home or your setup at work or wherever you're doing this should be very similar to this. If the videos that we play back are a little bit jerky, please feel free to check out either Leader Academy or our YouTube channel, where that will be corrected. And with that said, we're going to dive straight into it. Again, it's not a sales-focused webinar at all, purely going to be focusing on the guest portal setup. So quickly, just want to discuss the objectives for today. So what we're going to do is build our guest portals and see how we can actually implement different types of guest portals, and how we're going to separate out our networks respectively to make sure that guest traffic is isolated to where it needs to be. We're going to look at bandwidth profiles, how we set up bandwidth profiles for the different networks. And we're also going to see how we schedule Wi-Fi if we only want to have our guest networks active at a certain time. We're also going to look at our guest hotspot authentication methods, the different ones that are available on Ubiquiti. We're also going to take a look at the captive portal and how to customize that. And we'll take a look at payment gateway options or payment options, as well as the gateway integrations. And we'll also take a look at guest hotspot, the roles, etc., that are associated with that. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. What we're going to look at first is our networks and our landing page, essentially. So we're going to take a look at the topology, what we have right now. We're going to look at how we create the various networks. We're going to see how the landing page works. And we're also going to look at local network restrictions as well. So I'm going to play the video and I'm just going to talk to you guys around that. So this is my topology currently. As you can see, it's a Dream Machine Special Edition, getting set up with a switch. I've got a camera on here as well, and then just a UAP SHD. As you can see, everything right now is on default. It's on the default network, which is the 192.168.1.x range. And you can see there's no clients associated currently. So the first thing I typically tend to do is start with the networks side of things. So what I'm going to do is I firstly want to move away from the default network and rather create, for example, a corporate network and a guest network, which is the main objective for today. For my corporate network, I'm going to separate out the IP addresses. So I'm going to create an entirely different range. I'm going to do this on 10.0.1. Whatever, or I can make this 10.0.10, which is actually the preferred way for me to do it. And I'm also going to match my VLAN to that as well, just for simplification purposes. There's not much else we need to do here. I'm just going to create a standard network. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a guest network quite similar to that, but instead I'm going to use 10.0.20.1 as my gateway, and my VLAN ID is going to be in the 20 range as well. So the reason I'm creating a corporate and a guest network is so that my management traffic, so in other words, the management interface is only available on a specific LAN, and the users that are connecting to either my corporate or guest network will only reach the network they intend to. I've also set up content filtering on my guest network here, just to cut out the unwanted traffic types. And then I'm also going to just create a VoIP network here. This is a pretty standard setup. So normally we tend to separate out the traffic here, but the VoIP traffic in this instance will be more intended for wired traffic, which we're not really going to care about too much. No filtering that needs to be applied on that. This is just for an example. With that setup, what we can typically do as well is, the next point I will go to is the guest hotspot profile. And in the guest hotspot, we have a couple of different authentication types. By default, it's set to no authentication. So it's just open. Anyone connects to it will connect straight through. We're going to see that in a moment as well. So just quickly want to mention some of the ones that are less popular, but are still available on the interface. So Ubiquiti has the option for Facebook Wi-Fi, which allows you to sign in at a company and essentially get access to their Wi-Fi. You can also still use a external hotspot gateway if you prefer, although this gateway has to be hosted locally. So there's no integration to third-party hotspot gateways. And then I can also use Facebook authentication type, which essentially means it signs in with people sign in with their Facebook username and password. We also have a WeChat option here if you prefer to use WeChat, which also has payments options as well. So the ones we're going to be looking at primarily is passwords, and we're going to look at the vouchers, and we're going to look at payments options, and we'll even take a look at radius authentication as well. Each one of these has their own advantages, and as we progress through it, we'll see how we can set those up and how it presents to the customer that is trying to authenticate. First, what I'm going to do is just password, just a basic, simple password authentication. So similar to how you would see at an airport Wi-Fi, for example. In terms of my landing page, I can choose to either customize an image and upload it to the background, or I can just use a Unsplash gallery and it will upload an image to keep onto my UDM for authentication purposes. So I'm just picking a random one here. Obviously, you would get something that fits the style of your business. And from here on out, we can customize this a lot further. We can add our own logos. We can give this a separate name. We can enable the terms of service, which is a good idea, generally speaking. We can also add welcome text if we want to, and we can do stuff like adjust how long this network should be active before it expires, etc. In terms of the languages, we can add different languages in, and we can also say, so in this example, I'm setting the default expiration here, so I can override that to say it should be guests that have authenticated should stay active for longer. In the landing pages, I can say, for example, that if someone authenticates, what should be the redirect after that? So should it go to the original URL that they were trying to get to, or should it go to a specific URL? It just needs to be a full URL, not the just abbreviated one that I have there. So you need the actual FQDN. In terms of the redirection as well, we're going to take a look at this in a lot more depth in a moment to see how that impacts your network. And on my hotspots, I typically want to restrict local access as well. So that's what the bottom 3 rows there is used for. So essentially it limits your access to the local address ranges, so 192.172 and the 10 dot range, so that guests that authenticate by default have no access to those pages. Oh, sorry, those IP addresses, I mean. From there on out, the next step that I tend to take when doing this is I set up my bandwidth profiles. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up my authentication method as password, create the SSIDs, and we're going to see how that Wi-Fi scheduling works. So what I'm going to do here, I've set my authentication method to password. Next thing I want to do is I typically want to restrict the amount of traffic that my guest network can create. So I will say, for example, that my guest network is only allowed to have X amount of bandwidth so that they don't use my entire internet connection for guest network traffic types. So if a big download gets triggered, it doesn't flood the rest of my network. And then I'm also creating a corporate bandwidth profile here, and with this bandwidth profile I will obviously make that a lot less restrictive and give people access to more bandwidth. That's still quite conservative, but obviously it depends on what you're setting up in the real world. So my bandwidth profiles have been set up and my networks are set up. Next thing I need to do is I need to actually go create my Wi-Fi. So I'm going to again do something similar. I'm just going to create a corporate Wi-Fi. I'm going to create a guest Wi-Fi. You'll see that in the network type, I can select the network that it should be associated to. I have a lot of granular control over which Wi-Fi band it should be applied to, and I can also say the Wi-Fi type here is standard instead of guest hotspot. I've applied the corporate bandwidth profile, and other than that, I don't really need to adjust much. In the security type, because this is going to be authenticated via password, I can leave that on WPA2. So that is fine. Actually, thinking about that, it should actually be open and not WPA2 because the authentication will be done on the guest hotspot side. Next one, sorry, that was the corporate network. So yes, obviously, it needs to have WPA2 authentication because that's what our employees will use. On the guest network side of things, I obviously need to make that an open authentication method. One of the things to note here as well is that client device isolation is enabled by default. And here we go. So you'll see my security protocol, because I've selected this as a guest network, will be open by default. Last option there is to create our Wi-Fi scheduler. That's essentially the times during which the Wi-Fi SSID will be broadcast. If it falls outside of that schedule, it will actually stop broadcasting that SSID, preventing people from authenticating. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them through. We will be answering all the questions towards the end as well. So if you want me to go into more depth about any of these topics, please do let me know. So before looking at password authentication, this is more on the client side, we'll take a look at how the process would flow if I didn't have any authentications set up. Essentially, this would be someone coming into your business, they click on your guest Wi-Fi, and as soon as they click on that, they go directly through. So this is me doing it, literally just connecting to guest Wi-Fi. And you'll see that I don't get prompted for anything. I don't see anything listed here. As soon as I click on my browser, it will instantly take me through, and the authentication process is complete. So just as a very simple handshaking in order to grant me access. Some devices will go as far as automatically jumping onto any open networks. And it's for that reason that I normally recommend that if you're creating a guest Wi-Fi, that there is some sort of authentication method, even if it's just a simple password, just to prevent devices, random devices going past your building, for example, from jumping onto your network and taking advantage of your Wi-Fi. Going on to password authentication, so this is by far the most popular method of authentication. We face a little bit of a problem here. So I'm again jumping onto the guest Wi-Fi, and now it's expecting a password, but the first prompt I get is it will firstly tell me I need to connect to my portal, and next it's telling me the site is insecure, and in order to proceed I need to go advanced, proceed to that address, and then only can I see the landing page. Obviously, if I had guests into my premises, this would discourage them from using my free Wi-Fi, and you'll see all the pop-up messages, etc., saying not secure. So one way to get past this is by using SSL certs, and there's an entire Ubiquiti article explaining exactly how to import those SSL certs and essentially use them for authentication purposes, so that you don't get presented with this insecure portal. Another option, which is a little bit more of a sneaky way to do it, is to go back to the profile, the guest hotspot profile, and just detick the secure portal option. So it's not a perfect solution, but it will it will look better to anyone authenticating to it. So I've deticked that option, and you'll see as soon as I do the authentication now, it's going to come up and it's going to say my my address is still not secure, but it doesn't prompt me for that to accept advanced, etc. So it doesn't look quite as bad. But obviously the preferred method here is to have an actual SSL cert or have that signed in some way. I typed in the password, and as you can see, it's taken me straight through to the internet, and I now have full authenticated access. Just a note that obviously when you're using guest portals, your console or your UDM or whatever you're using does have to be online, because that is the device that actually handles the authentication. The access point doesn't store any of the authentication credentials. All the authentication typically happens on the UDM or the cloud key or whatever it is you're using. So let's quickly take a look at, now that the authentication is done, how the device isolation works. So this is set up by default when you're using a guest portal. normally you would have to go create a whole bunch of firewall rules to say that certain networks do not have access to other networks. But because the type that we've used is a guest network, it's automatically gone and created those rules for us. And if I, for example, try to, so I'm just doing a speed test here, if I try to reach any other part of my network, so for example, my default gateway, which is the gateway for the device that I'm actually hosting this on, you'll see as soon as I try to ping that, it doesn't actually do anything. It can't reach it. If I go change it to the gateway that I've set up for my specific network, which is 10.0.10.1, it also doesn't do anything. It's restricted by default. And if I try to reach any of the other networks, it will also, again, it will not allow me to reach that. Even if I try to reach any other clients on the same network. So if we have two devices connecting to the same guest network, it will actually prevent those two client devices from connecting to each other. You can also choose to override that. So if you want a specific device, like let's say you have a guest that needs to have access to a NAS or something like that, you can enable that via the firewall rules as well to override that functionality. But by default, it tries to make it so that it's restricted and the guests cannot access each other. So I see a couple of questions coming through. I'm going to answer those straight towards the end. So we'll review them as we get to that. In terms of the other authentication methods, we're going to leave the password authentication in place here. And instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to enable a few other authentication methods. The first one I'm going to use here is payment. So we do actually have an option to take payments on this platform by default. And what I can do is I can go into the payment section. First one is I'll just create a random payment here. So let's say this is at a hotel and you want a guest to pay for internet access. You can essentially say this is going to cost $15 for 24-hour access, and you can set certain bandwidth restrictions. So this is quite handy if you have something like a coffee shop or hotel or something like that, where you want people to have access but not unconditional access. You can also choose how you charge this, what your company name is, etc. And you can choose what credentials the user should provide when registering. So for example, I'm saying here the first name and last name of the person registering is needed, and I've set the email address as a requirement. I also have an option here. I can add additional packages as many as I want and make this granular as I want. I also have an option for free trials. So I can say, for example, that someone has 10 minutes access, and if they have used their 10 minutes, they have a 24-hour blockout period before they can access that free trial again. So very nice to have that level of control. Before I can apply this though, I obviously need to set up a payment gateway. So there's a couple of different options across the world. In Australia, we have Merchant Warrior, which you can sign up with, obviously, and they just handle the payment gateway integration, grab the API keys and integrate them from there. So really easy. You can also apply for test accounts if you really want to. So I'm going to add some fictitious details into this, and what I'm going to do from there is I'm going to do a quick authentication as the client again to show you what this would actually look like. So sorry, I think I skipped one slide there. So again, doing my authentication. So coming up with the primary page, my guest portal, my walled garden, you'll see firstly that I now have more package options. So before I can do anything here, I need to accept the terms of use which we set up. And now I can use a password. I can pay by credit card for this package that I've created. I can add my card number in, etc. And then of course I can add the billing details that I've made compulsory to add in. And then if I click on the free trial button, it will instantly give me access to the internet for 10 minutes. And essentially I can keep using that for 10 minutes. And after that period's up, it'll lock me out for 24 hours that I've set up. So really easy. Obviously, you want your captive portal in that instance to be secured via an SSL cert or something like that. And again, just for that level of trust so that anyone getting to that page doesn't suspect that this is a bogus page of some sort. Going on from there, let's remove out the password and payments options and rather look at vouchers. So voucher systems, I'm sure you've all come across. Again, you get to a hotel and they give you a voucher for X period of time. So they can say, for example, you're going to stay with us for 7 nights, and for 7 nights, we'll give you complimentary guest access at a specific rate. And the voucher system is, again, it's built into the UDM. Don't need any external systems for this. I just need to go to vouchers. I also have an option here for the hotspot manager, which we'll look at in a sec. But with this, I can say, for example, that I'm going to create a hotel guest package. I can say the quantity that I want. So in this example, it would be 10. I can say whether it's valid for one use or for multiple. Typically, it would be multiple use. You would say what the expiration period is, and you can apply the upload and download rate limits as well. You can even say they're not allowed to download or upload more than X amount of data. And if I wanted to, you'll see there's a code generated. If I wanted to go expand on this and print on these things, I would go to the Hotspot Manager section. This section is meant for receptionists, etc., and it's a separate part of the interface. You can create a role that just has access to this. This page essentially can see everything that relates to guest authentication. So there's the free trial that I signed up for a moment ago, and you'll see that it's listed there. Alternatively, if I want to go to my vouchers here and, for example, print these out so I could give them to guests as they enter the building, I can go do that. And that page that you're seeing right now, you can actually customize as well. So you can say, format the look and feel of that voucher. I can also revoke a voucher if I see misuse on my network for some reason. I can also allow this person to create vouchers, and they can decide within their own prerogative what these vouchers should look like. What's cool about this as well is that you can actually choose to just print all unused vouchers. So as you print a voucher, it will consume that voucher. And you can essentially then say, I'm going to create another 50 vouchers or 100 vouchers, or whatever I want, and it will print those unused vouchers out if I do select that option. So this is, again, ideal for coffee shops, hotels, and places like that. Really, really powerful that you don't have to rely on something third party to actually do this. Going on from there, let's quickly take a look at radius authentication. Radius authentication has an advantage in that it can actually, based on the username and password that is used, put a user onto a different network. So let's say, for example, you don't want 2 SSIDs, you just have one SSID, let's say guest SSID, or let's make it simpler, let's say it's the leader SSID. So for the entire company, it would be one SSID. But based on the username and password that we give each user, it should put them into respective networks, either guest network or corporate network. So to do this, the first thing I would normally do is I would go try to select the authentication type as radius, but before we can actually do that, we need to head over to the profile section again and just enable the default radius server. We can say which network this applies to or which ports this is applicable to, so your wired network or your wireless network. And then we can create users for here. So we can say, for example, that this would be a guest user. And based on the username and password entered, he or she would automatically get put into VLAN 20, which is the guest network. And I need to select the tunneling type as 13 and 6 respectively in order to handle that tunneling protocol correctly. So I've created that user, and essentially as soon as that is applied, I now need to go set up my Wi-Fi network correctly for this as well. So one of the things I need to do typically is, so I'm just going to search around here. There we go. So I'm just going to take out the authentication methods as password, change that to radius authentication. I can say the default radius profile is being used, which is what I've set up. I can also change the chat methods as well if I prefer. Once that radius has been set up, any user that tries to connect to this SSID will get to the landing page again. So it's redirecting them to the landing page that I set up. And now it's saying that in order to continue, I need to enter a username and password. This gives you a lot more granular control because it means you can also remove users or add users. So if a person leaves the company, for example, you can remove the user rights, etc., etc. So a lot more granular method of control. And then one really cool and rather unique use case that I've seen, so this is just a bonus thrown in here. I've replicated a setup of one of our partners. Essentially, what he's doing is he's using guest hotspots in order to incentivize his children for chores. And the way he's doing this is with a voucher-based system. And the simple concept is that if his kids do a chore, they get a 24-hour voucher for internet access, which I thought was quite novel. I just quickly want to show you how this is set up. So you would have a child network and a parent network. Both these networks are separated from each other, and I have more granular control over each of these networks. So the parent network in this instance would be virtually unrestricted. There's nothing applied to it. And the child network in this instance is on a separate domain. I can also say the content filtering is applicable to family type, which does block a lot of the malicious content. And as soon as that's applied, I can, again, take a more granular approach to this. In my guest hotspot authentication, I'm using vouchers as my primary method. And in this instance here, what's been done is it's just created 100 vouchers. Or I'm creating 100 vouchers. And actually, I've already set up 100 vouchers there. And I can print out those 100 vouchers and just keep them and essentially assign them for every chore that was completed. There are the 100 vouchers that are already created. I can print these out in bulk and essentially use that for authentication purposes. You'll see it comes up with all of the vouchers. Again, if I wanted to go really granular on this, I can customize the look and feel of that. So with those vouchers, they can authenticate as a regular user, and certain restrictions can also be applied. So I can, for example, say revoke a voucher, again, if for some reason I want to revoke the internet access. But because this is a separate Wi-Fi, separate SSID, I have more control over when this SSID is active and what's allowed on it. So at the bottom here, I have an option to say the SSID is only available during a certain time. I also have a separate bandwidth profile. I can even take this a step further and add a MAC address allowed list to say they are only allowed to connect to this network with the devices that I've given them, preventing outside access of different devices. In this example, I've said that the Wi-Fi is available during certain times of the evening, and they can't access Wi-Fi outside of those periods. And then I've set up traffic management rules here as well. So for example, I can say to block stuff like Snapchat or WhatsApp or TikTok or whatever we want at predefined intervals. So if I say, for example, no socials are allowed between 6 o'clock in the evening and midnight, then essentially it will apply this rule. And I can say this is only applicable to the child network in this instance. So the parents can still do as they want. I can even take this a step further and speed limit that if I want to. Or for example, I can say we don't allow Facebook at all. And as a result of that, I'm just blocking Facebook access all the time. And if I was a guest user, I can essentially try to go to that page, won't allow me to reach it. I have a lot of control over the security that I want to employ on this network, etc. And I have a lot more flexibility in terms of how those users authenticate. As soon as a user authenticates, it will automatically restrict that network out. And that's just a very quick overview of the guest hotspots. We do go into a fair amount of detail in the Leader Ubiquiti training as well. So if you want any more info around this topic, what you can do as well is you can reach out to webinars@leadersystems.com.au, or alternatively, you can visit our Leader Academy page as well, and essentially either attend one of the training sessions or just reach out to us if you have any specific questions. So just with regards to Ubiquiti training, we obviously do have Ubiquiti training around the country. Some of the dates have already gone past, but we do have training coming up pretty much for the rest of the year as well. New dates are constantly being added. So as I mentioned before, all of the webinars that we've already completed should be on our Leader Academy page, or alternatively on our YouTube channel. I highly recommend the YouTube channel because you automatically get updates as they get rolled out. And we still have a couple of webinars coming up Next one is going to be focused on firewall and security. We're also going to be looking at client access point steering, which is a hot topic for a lot of you. And we're also going to look at the 60 gigahertz range as well. That link again, should you want to go to the site, is simply just leader-academy.com.au.